Now you get to listen to me, so there was that idea. Anyway, really don't know a lot to say about this. It's a little different, for me at least. When you're preparing, you pray, and you ask for guidance, and you're given an idea or you're shown something, and you start looking into it, trying to learn something about it, get an idea of what you're going to say, what scriptures to cite, etc. And I've mentioned before that sometimes you think you've got it, and all of a sudden he's like, no, we're not going to do that. You're going to do this instead. Well, that happens on occasion. In this case, it was just being led to read some things that I found online, some other ideas, actually sermons from other pastors, a lot of reference. Anyway, long and short of it, this is more a message of encouragement than a sermon. Call it as you like. That's what I've come up with. It's basically encouragement for everybody. I hope everybody gets something out of this. I've certainly got something out of it, something that I needed. I mean, there's joy in our home after the appointments with the doctor this past week and knowing how hard all y'all have prayed for us and everything. But I'm a firm believer you can never have too much prayer, you can never have too much encouragement. So hopefully everyone will get something out of this. The story seems so modern. A man was stuck in a rut at his job. He didn't like his work, didn't enjoy being around his co-workers, caught a lot of flack from everybody, grief, really wanted out, looking for something else. Things weren't going well. He really wanted to escape that situation. So one day his boss comes to him and mentions this great new opportunity. Wants to know if he's interested. Well, absolutely. He trusted his boss, and if his boss said this was a great opportunity, let's go, let's get out of here. So anyway, it involved leaving home and traveling to another country, being there for quite some time. So he got ready, made his arrangements, gathered his things, said goodbye to his friends and family here, and away he went. So when he got there, he went to the first town to try to create a new market for the product. Well, there were only a few people that showed any interest at all in what he was offering, what he was talking about. They just didn't care, didn't want to hear it. So between that competition and everything, it got so bad that one of his competitors actually had him assaulted and thrown in jail. The boss found out about it, arranged for his release, helped him, and they were told to leave the town and not come back. So they went to another town to try to establish business interests there. They did, and they found a little better acceptance, and things were starting off real good. A lot of important people in this city showed interest in what they were doing. But before long, the competition came around and started trouble again. Once again, they were ran off, threatened, mistreated, ran off. So they went to another city, and then a fourth city, and it was the same. Rejection, abuse, slander, libel, mockery. By now, the man was wondering what was going on. What was this great new opportunity the boss had told him about? He saw no great opportunity. All he saw was rejection. Nevertheless, though, he went to a fifth city. There again, there was a promising start, but it too began to fade as competition stirred up trouble. The man was thoroughly discouraged. That night, his boss called him and he said this: "Do not be afraid, Paul. Don't let them silence you. Speak boldly, for I have many people in this city. I will be with you. Therefore, no one will be able to attack or harm you." This is from Acts chapter 18, verses 9 and 10. These are some of the things that Paul faced and had to deal with when he followed the leading of God to do as he was told. Now, a lot of people would have said, that's it, I've tried. Not even 3 strikes and you're out. I've tried 5 times. I've been mistreated. I've been made fun of. My God has been mocked. I've been abused. I'm going home. But Paul didn't. This story from Acts starts with his travels in Asia Minor. He wanted to go off in several areas, but the Lord kept saying no. Then he received the Macedonian vision to cross the Hellespont into Macedonia. The 5 cities were Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, and Corinth. By the time the uprising in Corinth happened, Paul had been beaten, imprisoned, mocked, hunted down. If anyone had a right to be discouraged, it was the Apostle Paul. The words from the Lord came to encourage Paul at exactly the right moment. The success of the mission did not depend on Paul's abilities, but the plans and power of God. The strength of God would be demonstrated not in Paul's strength and wisdom, but rather in Paul's weaknesses. God did not call Paul to fail, but to succeed. Paul had not been able to establish anything in the cities previously visited. Apparently, he left Luke behind to strengthen the work in Philippi. He was particularly concerned about Thessalonica. He feared the worst there and sent Timothy on a salvage mission. It seemed Paul expected a dismal report, but was delighted and surprised that things were going well there. Again, the success of God's work does not depend on us, although by his grace, he calls us to join him in his work. You know of the good report in the letter that we call 1 Thessalonians. Paul was encouraged and strengthened. The encouraged and thankful Paul takes pen and paper and along with Silas and Timothy writes off a letter of encouragement that we call 1 Thessalonians. Whether it was written before or after 2 Thessalonians is debated by scholars. It might have some relevance to some of the issues Paul dealt with, but it does not matter so much for the text here in question. Paul the encouraged now became the encourager. He knows the severe trials the church had undergone in his forced absence. He wants to encourage the believers to persevere through their doubts and trials. The same Lord who had seen him through a particularly rough spot will see the Thessalonians through. He follows his greeting to the believers by reminding them that the Thessalonians' welfare was constantly in their prayers. He was grateful to God for the things that were going well in Thessalonica. He mentions their faith was demonstrating its vitality in their work for the Lord, which was motivated by love. Their hope had allowed them to endure all the hardships they had faced. Paul does what a lot of pastors do when they use a prayer as an extension of a sermon. He had let them in on the content of his thanksgiving prayer to God to remind them that God was at work in them. Paul continues his encouragement of them by reminding them they were loved by the very God who had chosen them. What encouragement it is to know that the God of the universe cared for them as a church and as individuals. And we all should know that he loves every one of us just as much as any other. We're the ones that come up short, turn our back, don't listen. These are not attributes of our God. Anyway, the proof of this love was the powerful working of the Holy Spirit which accompanied the preaching of the gospel. There's a big difference between just saying, I love you, and saying I love you and proving it by action. Not only did God love them, but Paul loved them, and he demonstrated it. First by sending Timothy to check on their welfare, and then writing this special letter to them. Surely Paul had a lot to do already at Corinth, and he had to care for the churches at Philippi and Berea, as well as those in Galatia. When Paul, who had a lot on his plate, took time to lay all that aside to deal personally with them, it served as a means of encouragement to those believers. It showed the depth of his care. The demonstration of the power of the Spirit for the Thessalonians also proved Paul's apostleship and message, that it had indeed come from God. Perhaps Paul felt some there doubted his sincerity about wanting to return to the city and used the hindrance of Satan as an excuse. They had no reason to doubt what they had heard and experienced. The church had suffered under the hand of earthly rulers and powers and needed to be reminded there was a power greater than the politicians or even the emperor. This served to further strengthen and encourage them. Paul goes on to tell them that their endurance of suffering served as a positive example to the other churches in Macedonia and Achaia. Some pronounce it Achaia. Just imagine I said it the way you like it. The Christian gospel is authenticated not only in the power of the Holy Spirit, but in the endurance of persecution by the believers for the gospel's sake. A faith worth dying for is a faith that is worthy to live by. The Christian message cannot be authenticated by a theology of glory alone. There is also a theology of the cross that Christians following the Lord must equally embrace. Paul reminds us in Romans that if we suffer with him being Christ, we will also be glorified with him. The Thessalonians are commended by Paul that their faith embraced both glory and the cross. This is a contagious faith that makes news because it is so different from worldly expectations that one can have gain without pain. The Christian gospel is not some romantic escape novel. It is a living faith that perseveres through suffering because of the glory that follows the cross. Paul continues to show the work of God in that they turn from worshiping idols to worshiping the one living God. He also commends them for keeping their eyes on the goal, which was the return of Jesus, who had been raised from the dead, the same Jesus who had rescued them. In times of discouragement, it is always good for Christians to be reminded of whose they are and where they are going. If we read these verses in isolation from the rest of the epistle, one would think this was a church that had it all together. They had it made. What a glowing report. Who would not be encouraged to hear such? However, there were many issues that Paul did have to deal with. Even though they were commended for waiting for the return of Jesus, they were also getting some things wrong. In chapter 4, Paul has to deal with them because they mistakenly believed that only those who were still alive at Jesus' return would be resurrected into eternal life. They thought those who had died in the congregation were lost. Paul had to strongly correct this notion. Others felt the coming was so near that they were quitting their jobs and causing scandal and uproar by freeloading in the community. They thought time was up. Do what I please now. Paul had to tell them they were still required to work, and that Paul himself, when not with them, did not freeload but worked night and day. They were right in expecting Jesus' return, but wrong in acting out the implications. We can see the true nature of encouragement is more than just praise, although that is a vital component. Paul usually in his letters is upfront with praise. We must also understand Paul is praising God for the work he was doing in the believers' lives and in the people themselves. Boasting of human accomplishments, especially when it's truly the work of God, is idolatry. Paul is clear that all human boasting is excluded in the presence of God, who works in us both to will and to do of his good pleasure. We are entirely saved by the grace of God through faith, which in itself is a gift from God. Not something we can earn, not something we deserve, but a gift from our God. Paul realizes that correction is also an important component of encouragement. Unlike modern means, which seems to praise just the good and ignore the bad, Paul holds both praise and correction as necessary. Indeed, in Hebrews, believers are told that chastisement is further proof they are God's children. If God didn't care, he wouldn't bother to correct us and show us where we screwed up. Paul encourages them for where they have come from, but he also encourages them to continue on. How do we face discouragement? Too often it seems we grumble and complain to others. We become discouragers rather than encouragers. Maybe we need to learn the lesson from this morning's message. If we find that we're tearing down rather than building up, we need to look again at the promises of God to bring us through our disappointments and discouragement and trials to victory. Perhaps things aren't going as well as we would like. Maybe things appear quite bad right now. If we will only remember the battle belongs to the Lord, and victory over these trials is by our weakness in the face of God's strength, then our discouragement will become encouragement. Let us be like David, who in the midst of dangerous trials encouraged himself in the Lord. We must remember that all things work together to good to those who love God, who are the called according to his purpose. Not all things are good. Some things that we undergo are quite unpleasant. However, all things good and bad are part of God's plan to benefit us. When we have been encouraged in the Lord, let us realize that we are encouraged to encourage others. Now, in this church, we've all seen time and time again that we lean on each other. We pray for each other, extend our hands to help one another, and that we love one another. And that's wonderful, and that's something I hope is always true in this church and everybody here. But just like in this message, each of us, that we all know what our shortcomings are. We need to continue to work on those. Pray to God to correct us, take those shortcomings away, or help us to deal with them, and continue in the work we've been given. I don't know what everybody will get out of this. I don't know if everybody will get anything out of it. I hope we do. But I can tell you this. In reading through Acts, Thessalonians, reading, I won't even guess how many pages and pages of stuff online, Saturday, Sunday, I realized a few things, and this one kind of hit home today. And I hope that you'll receive it, and that it encourages you, and that you pass that on. As encouraging as those words are, I encourage you also, if you are not right with our Father, today is the day. If you don't believe time is short, think about all the people that were slaughtered in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas. Shopping, going about their own business, never dreaming they were fixing to step across into eternity. I don't know those people, obviously. I don't know which direction their travel plans are for. But I know where you can go if you accept Christ. And today is a day because, believe it or not, and I'm not trying to bring you down, but what happened to them could happen to any one of us just as easily. Just as easily. We don't know the hour of his return. We don't know the hour of our passing either. And I'm not a gambler. And I want you to be. So, I encourage you, come forward. Let us pray with you, help you in any way that we can. But accept Christ, accept that precious and perfect gift that's given to us that we cannot earn.
Thank you.
opportunity to share these words. I ask you to bless them and plant them in everyone's heart. Show them the intent. Show them the meaning behind the words, Lord. Encourage everyone to open those Bibles and read them for themselves. To be open to your teaching, your leading, your example. Help us to share it, Lord. Help us not to just keep it inside.